Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
This is the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for choosing this podcast. You have so many choices, and yet here we are again with our little show that was designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, here we are again.
Yes, we are, and I'm happy to report that spring is almost upon us. Those of us that live way up in the Northlands, we had snow earlier this week, and I'm happy that it's all gone. And the forecast for Saturday, 81 degrees. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's so nice. You know what happens when spring comes to Texas, Craig? It's like 100 degrees and humid. So I like winter because that's when it's 80 degrees here. So Craig and I always banter about the weather, and I don't know if the audience likes that or not, but it's what we do. All right, so today we have a great interview. We are joined by Viswa Kuppuswami, and he is from a company called Zumen. And what he does is he runs this SaaS startup for product manufacturing companies. What they do is they help you manage the direct material procurement process. Hey, Viswa, welcome to the show.
I really appreciate you guys having me over here, and I'm excited to go through this conversation. Looking forward to it.
Every week, Craig and I try to bring really interesting people to this show, and you fit right into that category. Can you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Before starting this company, I spent about 20 plus years in product manufacturing, primarily in the industrial equipment manufacturing space. Across the entire life cycle of the product, I spent several years in the testing and the duty cycle measurement. We never had the word IoT back then, but we used IoT for R&D. And that's where I started my career working primarily on agriculture tractors, and then eventually moved into, putting together validation programs for all different kinds of equipment, including, construction, forestry, mining, so on and so forth. And then eventually moved into different roles like, warranty analysis and, customer satisfaction surveys and product quality reliability, and then eventually, running my own product programs. And that's how I learned whatever I learned about, how products are brought to market. And at some point, I became a product head and ran a very large product line, close to about, let's say, $700 million worth of product line that was a manufacturer of India and shipped to across the world. So that's my background. And finally, when I decided it was time for me to do something on my own, and when the idea came together that all my experience in bringing the product to market was, taken into a software where people can actually manage their product introduction process globally, that was the time I said, okay, now I know what I have to do. Quit the job, start the company. So we are about 3 years into building the company right now. Very excited.
So welcome to the show, Viswa. And you almost said it. So I want you to explore a little bit. Mm-hmm. What was the catalyst? So you're a product manager. You've been doing manufacturing for a few decades. Why Zumen? Why now? What's the catalyst? Was it just your headaches, or was it something else?
Yeah. I mean, if you have been through this, you would know how managing all different moving pieces and coordinating with all the different functions within the industrial space, trying to get that idea from design to launch is such a very, very laborious activity. It actually requires a platform of a cross-functional team to get that product out to the market. And that means you have a project manager in sourcing or procurement, you have a project manager in manufacturing, engineering, testing, and then the program manager that sits on top of all of that to make sure that you get All these guys talk with each other. They bring the information. So in that process, my experience was that getting the information from someone, from another function, to have visibility to where the product is was a very, very painful task. And the program managers or the project managers that tried to do that literally had to, they have to make something impossible possible, get people from different challenging functions who in themselves, in their own functions, have to deal with so many challenges. For example, let's take sourcing and procurement. And in this current age, all the news that we're talking about, the supply chain issues that we're seeing, people still have to make sure that thousands and thousands of parts that need to be sourced are, sourced from the right people. With all of that activity, they still have to come and tell you what the status is. And if you're waiting for them to come and give you that, the pain that, that you have to go through as a product person. And think about this with all the different functions, right? So living through that was really the catalyst for me to say, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? There's enterprise process, there's business process, and all these different functional areas, departments that are happening where the data should be available in a system that need to be automatically visible across the entire enterprise, and that doesn't happen in most companies.
Yeah, describe that. Why doesn't it happen? Is it? You mentioned the silos pretty well. Is it just they don't have the right tools, or is it that they refuse to use the same tools?
Well, I think it's a combination of both.
Okay.
And if you see the enterprise landscape, there are three very, very critical systems that come into play. The first one being the ERP, right? That's where the enterprise software actually started. And long before that, people were still doing accounting. They were doing various different ways of doing it, manually, and I find it humorous. You start with ERP, right? You're a manufacturing guy, because so many other people, they say, oh, well, it starts with PDM and how I envision my design. And eventually I figure out how to manufacture it. In fact, successful manufacturing companies are exactly the opposite. And then if you don't make all your parts, which is the example you're talking about with direct material, then you absolutely got to do ERP first and then figure out the rest. This is interesting. This is different than our typical guest who is somewhere up in product design, right? So I interrupted you. So you got your ERP, and then what's next? The other one is, again, I'm a neutral guy to the product as much as I am a product person. The next part is how you actually plan your production and get the manufacturing going, right? To me, these two are very, very critical, because this is the revenue stream, right? And even when you see smaller companies slowly graduate and become mid-sized and then become large-scale enterprises, this is the sequence in which they actually roll out the systems. First is the ERP, second is the production and all the the manufacturing related aspects, and then third is the PLM, the PDM or the PLM. And we wish it started the other way, starting with the PDM and then going through. But we talk to so many companies even today that are growing and they're scaling. But the first thing they need from a business perspective is a proper ERP system. There's no dispute to that.
Yeah, and the large industrial companies like the one I came from, back in the day when it was all run by mainframe computers. Of course, we had an ERP system, but you couldn't buy it from anybody else because we'd built it over decades, right? Now, SAP being one of the biggest, right? There are plenty of choices out there, and now you've created Zumen to come along and do even more. So let's talk a bit more about the detail about, how you do this. So when product engineering is engineering a new product, even if 90% of the parts are direct material, they still have a BOM, right? They have a bill of materials that manages it. Do you get this BOM from a PDM solution, and then you go from there to do the contracting and do the scheduling of delivery and eventually the assembly of a product? Is that how this works?
That's exactly how it works. And the primary focus where we are right now, and by now how connected I am with respect to bringing the product to the market. So we focus very heavily on the new product development process. Okay. And that goes along with the theme today, which is the cost for the product. That's where we believe as you design a product, develop a product, you identify the right sources and the right technologies, and that's where you bake the cost into the product after you have done the right design, correct? So the way this works here is we take the handover from any PLM system. That's the best way. We prefer the data comes in. We are able to use the standard APIs and get the bill of material structure and explode that and share that to the new product development, the vendor development or the sourcing, whatever the companies call them, correct? And
so then do you grab the product from when the product sample, the prototype is validated, or do you? What's the overlap? Because sometimes you got long lead items that you buy from a supplier, and by long lead I mean you can't wait until you have a validated prototype. You kind of got to source them earlier, and maybe they're risky new technology like batteries in cars these days. So what's the overlap? And I guess it seems to me there must be a give and take back and forth between the product BOM and PLM and what you're managing in the ERP system. Am I right?
Absolutely. The way it works today in most of the companies is, you have the product lifecycle and then you have the procurement lifecycle, right?
Well, that's true. Yeah.
The point when you actually see the item come into the system in ERP is when you release, you create an item master, and then you see when someone is releasing a PO. You don't have any history attached to that. You don't have any technology discussions that happen around it. That's where we want to come in and say, hey, there's so much to it than just releasing the PO, okay? So we take over the bill of material, understand the items that go into the bill of material. It doesn't matter whether the part is actually released or it's still in a prototype stage or it's in a concept stage. We allow them to define the different part maturity types. And in fact, we can read them from the PDM or the PLM system. And we allow the different functions in the company to actually understand where the design is. Let's say they're still in a concept. You only have a 3D without a drawing, okay? And or you are at a prototype, not for production release, but you have a drawing that you can actually work with your supplier. So we handle all those different stages, and we allow them to release an advanced release or advanced communication with the supplier to say, hey, this is something that's going to be released. Eventually, we may need 10,000 pieces a year, 100,000 pieces a year, but I just need 10 to prototype and validate. So we can actually do a prototype purchasing in this as well, and you can continue rolling through that in the life cycle.
Okay, so I've got the model now. So there's a handshake going on between your system and the PLM systems, and they can cause changes based on design evolution, right, as they learn things in validation. Can you also, from a ERP point of view, can you influence them? In other words, you can say, oh, well, you had a cost target of whatever, $10, and nobody can build it for that. The cheapest we can get is 12 unless you change the design. And so it's like a design change coming from a supplier. Do you manage that as well?
We have what we call a pre-RFQ, where we open the channel of communication between the supplier and the designer. It's like the category buyer comes in, he opens the communication channel between these two guys and say, now why don't you guys communicate and let me know about where you end up. And at that point, they're able to go back and forth, discuss on the tech, discuss on the specifications, the testing requirements, reliability requirements, so on and so forth, before they actually go and close an official RFQ with the supplier. Yes, so at that point, they're able to discuss on the details to understand the cost structure and go back and redesign if needed, yes.
So it's interesting because the center of this then is a combination of the contract, the pricing, and probably something notion of a volume schedule, right? Because you only need a handful at prototype, like you said, but then whatever your mass production plans are, you're going to buy a 10,000 or 100,000 or a few million if you're in the car business, right? So this is interesting. And it, to the listeners, this whole area, this whole ERP, contract management should be digital, right? We're the digital enterprise society. You would think we'd have connected computers to do this, but at least in my opinion, largely for organizational reasons, and they're big organizations, by the way. So they have their own processes and they're not well connected. And so streamlining or improving this exchange back and forth is really good. You're on the right track. This needs to be solved. I'm curious, this craziness that's been going on today with supply chain disruptions for all the world events, which we don't need to list, but have people needed your tools more? Because they quickly, there's a famous story in the car side, where people were choosing a different chip, but they'd already had a validated product, right? It's just because of chip availability, IC availability. So I would think, to me, the ERP system's becoming more critical than ever as people try to adjust their supply chains, either adjust the part they're buying or even adjust the contractor they're working with, right? So Viswa, this is interesting. It seems to me, with the recent challenges we've all been experiencing with supply chain disruptions, that people would need to focus more on their enterprise resource planning, right, rather than less. Have you seen an increase in demand in your tools? I mean, after all, this whole thing should be digital. It should all be connected. So I'm curious if it's affected your business at all.
There is an increased understanding of a need for digitalization. Let me put it that way. And when I talk to people, they really appreciate which I think a few years earlier would have probably been a different reaction altogether. Now people say, yeah, I think we have had enough. We need to do a better way of doing this. That said, like you mentioned in the opening point in your question, in today's time, I think people are in the middle of the firefight. Yeah. So they're actually focused on putting out the fire than preventing it for future.
Yeah. But hopefully they learned their lesson, right?
But what would you do? I mean, you're in the middle of the fire. So I don't know. I really wish they had a two-pronged strategy, one for short term, one for long term. But I think it's a matter of time. I think we'll get there.
Well, I'll let you know a secret. The big industrial giants of the Midwest, they've always had a multi-pronged strategy. And I think it's just somewhat embarrassing. And this is probably a very American thing to say, but it's a little embarrassing to have so much of the chip manufacturing outside of North American continent. And I'm pretty sure this is going to get fixed. So the long-term point you're making, there's all kinds of announcements, whether it's down there in Texas where Thom is, in Austin, or whether it's in Columbus, Ohio. Those are the two I've been tracking. They're new IC foundries, right? And there are other places here in the Midwest that are IC foundries that have been mothballed because it was cheaper to have it done in Taiwan or whatever, or the Philippines. Well, I suspect it'll come back because of these supply chain issues. Now, some of those take a year and a half or two to develop or to build. And I think ERP systems digitized can help people see options, right? Well, I could source it for 10 cents less a part, which is a lot of profit. However, in the event of a war breaking out or a tsunami, all of a sudden I'm going to wish that it was on 100 miles away on a platform sitting somewhere in the Midwest, if that's where my manufacturing plants are, like they are for car guys. So, all right. So this is interesting. I understand the interaction. I understand the importance. I had a couple other thoughts for you, though. A lot of legal processes, I'm talking about the legal side of a contract and so on. Lawyers really prefer paper, right? And so are they coming along on this journey? Do they get that digitizing, being a digital record in a relational database, is actually better than a hunk of paper? I mean, what are you seeing? Are lawyers an advocate for this, or are they just coming along for the ride?
I mean, COVID changed everything upside down, right? So people really didn't want to touch anything that has gone through 1,000 miles. So many people had to handle it. Let's say you have your, the attorney sitting in a different state, and your operations team in a different state, your supply in a different state. So with COVID, people have gotten into doing this over different digital, contracting. And I think one of the largest, one of the strongest growth sectors in the last 12, 24 months has been digital contracting.
Interesting. Okay. So there you heard it, Thom. We're making news. The benefits of COVID are those laggards holding us back have realized that there's a way forward. So that's just interesting. Okay. So one of the other challenges with automating workflows is you move stuff faster, right? I mean, it's sitting in a database. You get a little notice, go look at this and do your job on it, approve it, and move on to the next step. Right. So things are moving faster. That's probably good for profits. But sometimes you need that slow, careful review or that well thought out review done by independent people. So I guess I see a concern that some of this workflow automation, you skip review steps. In your view of this, I presume you're keeping the review steps. It's just that you're making it easier for each person to do their job. We still have a peer review. It's just going a lot faster, right?
You absolutely said that. See the exactly the way it is working. So there are options with the tools to say either automated, set conditions so things can actually roll by themselves, but at the same time, given some conditions, they're able to take specific decisions through people for reviews. For example, let's say a sourcing manager or a category manager can have up to $250,000 for him to approve without any oversight, but beyond that, it has to go to somebody. So, just a very simple, straightforward example that I can give is, the moment you have something beyond $250,000, it has to go to the VP of procurement, for example. Yeah. So tools, almost all the tools nowadays have, ways to handle these, controls depending on the criticality and the need for those businesses.
And I bet you that list of criticality goes back to, does it have to cross an ocean? Does it have to cross a certain continent? Where they're shooting? Yeah. I mean, we used to do it. Back when I had to worry about buying a particular part, I was an engineer for controllers, right? And we had these exact discussions, right? Where's the silicon fabrication? Where's the assembly of the controller? And can it get to us on the ground? What we meant was shipping on the ground, not in the air, right? And it's just interesting that reading the news of the last 6 months, people are like, how come we have all these supply chain disruptions? Well, frankly, we overleaned it and we made it too piece cost sensitive when we didn't think about all those other costs, transportation cost, whatever the importing and exporting authorities do, right, in terms of approving it going in and out of a country.
What is the cost of disruption, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And we used to have a disruption quotient, and the disruption quotient was just that. It had to be below a certain number or you wouldn't source that way. I'm sure those rules have changed over the years, but I think they're probably getting updated again. And to your point, tools like yours can help enforce those new guidelines, right? I mean, maybe you really do want to source your electronics on the same continent as your product. Might make sense, actually, right? So, all right. So let's go one other dimension that usually has to get addressed. In a lot of products, especially cars this way, phones are this way, the cell phones and tablets and so on. There's a lot of common parts, right? Do you manage the parts library, the common elements, and then make sure that when they specify a BOM, you're looking at the common parts or the alternative parts? Is that also managed in your tools?
Yeah. So the way we wanted to do it in the first step is let people continue working the way they're working, but give them a framework for them to digitalize all of that information. So which means if the design engineer for that particular component is aware of an alternate part, or if he's aware of the reference parts, we expect them to capture that in the master data for that item in PLM. So as the master data gets into Zumen, they can actually get all of that data. The moment the reference and the alternate parts are available, we are able to take all of that information from ERP, bring all of that history, the cost, the supplier information, all of that, and we can show that side by side so they can make a better choice, the rest of the company, when they look at it.
So you must also then track the quality records, like a PPAP affidavit and things like that, which is a normal thing that, at least in the car world, we have certain quality standards. You have to see a certain document. You have to have a certain signed off, basically a letter that says you're allowed to ship to the factory. And so you keep a, what's the right word? Handle, reference, copy? Wait, are you the gold source for it, or do you just have a record of it so that engineers can examine it?
Zumen is the operating system for them to complete the new product sourcing. Okay. So as part of the sourcing, before you give the production contract, you would have done the alpha, beta, gamma, and the pilot, builds and all that. And during that process, you have done the initial samples, you have done the PPAP at some point, correct? So if they don't have any system for managing the PPAP, Zumen is actually a complete system to enable the buyers to complete that process along with the supplier quality engineers and the design engineers. They can actually collaborate in the same page. They can see what the inspection report is like, what the pictures are like, what the metallurgy is like, and they can actually approve and have conversations on top of the PPAP items, all the 16 of them.
So this is really good, Viswa. Yeah, I think what you're doing is excellent. I kind of wish I was still working, because we were a big car company, so we had a big PLM vendor, right? And we pushed them in this direction of cost management, and at least when I was leaving, we were starting to talk about contract management and things like that. But it's hard, right, for an international company that's got all kinds of legacy systems to consider and other things. So I think you're on the right track. I wanted to get kind of a insight into what your customers are saying. So I copied phrases from your website. Let me ask them real quick, and then I want you to tell me which ones you're seeing people want the most. So I saw accelerating, optimizing, eliminate manual dependency, compliance, and no duplicate data. You mentioned all these as benefits on your website. So a lot of them can be helped with digital technologies. Which ones are bringing the biggest benefit? What are your customers telling you that they really like the most?
What they like the most is a single system that helps them to complete the procurement process.
Tear down those silos.
That's basically what they meant. So they don't, with a system like Zumen, we eliminate all kinds of spreadsheet data.
Yeah.
And I mean, without a system that breaks the silos, every person in every department, every function is going to have its own set of spreadsheets, multiple versions of them, and the data is really, so. I mean, they don't intentionally keep it secret, but that's the only way they can do it. Right?
This is a comment about digital versus digitalization, right? We all got laptops. We all got Excel on our laptops. We can keep a spreadsheet, right? And spreadsheets are nice, right? You can organize things in columns. You can do pivot tables, all this other stuff. The trouble is everybody's got one, and everybody has their version of the truth. And so there isn't any truth because there's confusion, right? And so getting that kind of a user experience running off of a relational database where there's one version of the truth, and of course it goes through revisions, right? It changes over time. But getting people just to say, oh yeah, I don't need my Excel anymore. I just need the view I want, if I'm whatever my role is, into that database. So very good. Well, thank you for being a guest. I'm intrigued. I wish I was still full-time so I could play more with your tools. But as it is, I'll just talk about them. Hey, Thom, back to you.
No, this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. If people wanted to find out more about your company, where would they go? What's the website?
Zumen.com, Zumen. And they can also go to LinkedIn. We share a lot of information, a lot of the benefits and any insights that we could with respect to I want to mention one more thing, Craig. In the context of the PLM, the digital that we're talking about, basically what Zumen does is we extend the digital thread, and we help them complete the digital thread through the procurement lifecycle. Okay, we take it from inside of the design office and take it all the way through the procurement. So that's something that, in this context, it's very important because there are companies, there are tools that are trying to do that. And I think Zumen is one of the ones that actually do it a lot better and very differently. And we do it with an intention to maintain the user behavior. And when they look at the most common feedback that we get is, this is exactly how we do it. So this is going to work for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your background, right, it just helps, right? The fact that you were a chief of a product, you dealt with what's the excuse today? You got to be kidding me. We got different versions of the Excel spreadsheet. I mean, I lived the same pain, and you would just think we would not have that. So digital technologies can help this. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in and listen. Hey, I want you to come back every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and actionable information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out right now at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.